Hi, welcome back. So I've changed things up a little bit. I went back to short hair, went back to copper on top, and we're going to be talking about Tip Top Comics today. Um, this is from United Features, and while Lil Abner and Tarzan are now getting 4 to 5 pages an issue, we're going to be focusing today on two also ran features. This is going to be a deeper dive on two that you probably never heard of, and one that you maybe have, but under a different name. Because you may think that this one looks like Katzenjammer Kids, and you'd be right. Katzenjammer Kids was the original comic strip, and it is really, really old, going back to 1897. Rudolf Dirks, a German-born New Yorker raised in Chicago, was working for the New York Journal. The Journal wanted a comic strip to compete with this new phenomenon called the Yellow Kid. Yes, that's how long ago this was, and this is what Dirks made. He wrote and drew the strip until 1913 when he wanted a long break from work to tour Europe with his wife. The New York Journal didn't want to give him the strip when he came back. This may sound familiar. Back in episode 13, I talked about Alex Raymond losing Flash Gordon in a very similar fashion, but Raymond was willing to design a new strip with new characters instead. Back then, Dirks felt so cheated that he did something that rarely happens ever. He sued his boss and won. And then the judge did something even rare, if not unique, in the history of comic strips. He ruled that Dirks could retain the rights to the characters he had created, while the New York Journal would retain the name of the strip and get to use the same characters. And hence, Captain and the Kids was legally a legitimate clone of the Katzenjammer Kids characters. And here we are. And for 65 years, there was both a Katzenjammer Kids strip and a Captain and the Kids strip at the same time in different papers. When we first start reading the Captain and the Kids in this range of issues of Tip Top Comics, it is still gag-a-day fare, 4 pages per issue. Very violent gags, with at least the captain and at least one other person in the cast getting hurt. The kids, Hans and Fritz, and the captain are all sociopaths obsessed with causing each other pain or distress. Mama seems interested in caring for everyone until they defy her, and then her psychosis kicks in and she starts hurting people too. Though all from Germany, the entire cast just last year relocated to the tropical island of Squeegee. I guess so Dirks could draw different backgrounds. The strips here occur after their arrival, so I'm not sure why all these characters traveled here together, particularly the inspector, who isn't even family. He's just a truant officer from the school the boys don't go to anymore. It's a very strange island, with hippopotami and what appears to be African natives on it. A neighboring island is covered by seals, and a third island is populated by fierce Amazons. Issue 14 begins what is likely not the first long narrative story for the strip, but the first one reprinted in comic books. Hans and Fritz, perhaps rightly fed up with the toxic environment of their family life, flee from Squeegee Island. I don't actually have access to number 14, but in the following issue, the captain and the inspector are searching islands for them. They eventually find the boys, but the boys are on an island inhabited by a super strong caveman, and the caveman has taken a liking to the boys. Every time the captain and the inspector try to get the boys away, either the caveman stops them or an elephant, which also doesn't like these guys, stop them. After many days, the men are only able to escape with the boys after a storm frightens the caveman into hiding. It isn't a strip that I really enjoy reading, and yet there's something about this setting. It reminds me of the TV show Lost, where the island doesn't seem real and you never know what will turn up on it. And for some reason, I just really like the setting of this, of where these stories take place. Now, Peter Pat was an unusual strip. Not that the protagonist appears to be an 8-year-old boy. There was plenty of precedence for adolescent boy heroes like Terry of Terry and the Pirates, Dickie Dare, and going back to Little Nemo and Slumberland and Buster Brown, but where his adventures take place is what makes it unusual. Peter Pat wasn't dreaming like Nemo. He appeared to really be exploring a magical land filled with danger. The name is surely not coincidental, being so close to Peter Pan, but Pat is a remarkably good fighter for one so young, like Pan, and Pat's world of Pegoland could be seen as a larger and more populous version of Neverland. Peter Pat was the work of Mo Leff, the pen name of Morris Leff, a 25-year-old from Manhattan, the son of Austrian immigrants. He had worked as a cartoonist since he was 17. When he did the strip Ever Ready Eddie, for Dell Comics' aborted first attempt at the comic book, the first version of the Funnies. We don't know what he did after that. Hopefully finished high school. Until 1934 when he started Peter Pat. Peter Pat only lasted about a year and then was canceled, but United Features seems to have had a lot of confidence that Peter Pat was going to find an audience someday, and they kept reprinting it in comic books for years. It's extra unusual because, as you know from previous episodes, because most reprint books are pulling from comic strips just a few months old, Peter Pat's 3-year-old material is really unusual, if not the oldest strip still being reprinted at this time. When we first start reading Peter Pat, 2 pages per issue, but sometimes it's 3, he is exploring the realm of Pegoland, I think I'm pronouncing that right, with a little person named Pom who is good with a bow. They're exploring what looks like a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon. All of this is to find their way to the Castle of Gold, though we initially don't know why because the page where Pom explained it is missing or was never reprinted. In the middle of this arc, we discover that they're heading to the Castle of Gold to restore Empress Judy to her throne, recently deposed by Prince Logie, possibly because she just happens to be a little girl, or because he's evil, and this is a comic strip. Along the way, Peter has to fight monsters, often single-handed, along with the constant threat of Prince Logie's agent, Eric the Mad, and you know he's a madman because he refuses to put clothes on. This fantasy setting is dangerous enough for use in an actual D&D campaign, and while I've yet to test that theory, I have statted what I call the cheatable already. You would think that an empress would have better resources than adolescent boys, but for an 8-year-old boy, Peter Pat is crazy skilled. He is a weapons master with a knife, net, whip, and bolo, and can defeat monsters and men 4 times his age, can ride a horse, hog-tie a boar rodeo style, and is named a colonel eventually in Judy's army. It is all quite spectacular wish fulfillment fantasy for any boy, or at least one prone to violent fantasies. Violence seems to be a running trend in each of these comic strips, as are boys, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. Now, taking a different tact on the boys' adventure genre is Billy Make-Believe. Billy Make-Believe is much closer to a Little Nemo and Slumberland clone, as Billy's adventures are clearly fictitious in Billy's mind, but taking the form of daydreams instead of Nemo's surreal nighttime dreams and nightmares. Billy isn't alone in his daydreams. His friend, with the unfortunate nickname of Bub, always seems to be experiencing the daydreams with him, though it's unclear if Billy is imagining Bub seeing the fantasies, if Bub is really just good at pretending to go along with his more imaginative friend, or, and this blew my mind when I thought of it, if Bub is himself a fantasy in Billy's imaginary world and Billy is really just a lonely little boy. At first, Billy Make-Believe is yet another Gag-A-Day strip, sometimes Billy talking in rhyme and sometimes not as the strip finds its voice. But an extended fantasy story begins when Billy and Bub arrive in Toy Town, a place with living toys the same size as children. When Billy and Bub rescue a toy called Captain Button and a girl toy called Dolly Gay, and remember that gay means something very different back then, Dolly then takes a liking to Bill, enraging her jealous suitor, a toy called Jumping Jack. Thinking this is a good idea, Jack abducts Dolly just to get her away from Billy. The toy police and the toy army conduct a dragnet to find Jack and Dolly, but Jack has fled town by plane. Somehow, and some pages were missing, Billy alone finds Jack and Dolly in the painted desert outside of Toy Town. But then the three of them are attacked by wooden Indian toys. Some pretty racist depictions of Native Americans follow, along with a cavalry led by Colonel Custard, patterned after General Custer. During more pages that were missing, Dolly and Jack somehow disappear from the story, and Billy and Bub are alone trying to get back to Toy Town with the aid of the Green Man-like Trip Van Twinkle. Whew. So what do all three of these strips have in common? Well, they have violence, racism, and pre-adolescent, not adolescent, but pre-adolescent boy heroes. Now, two of these are just emblematic of the times that they're occurring in. Violence is just very common in entertainment, more than we would accept today. And then the other thing is, of course, the racism of the comic books, which I've had to talk about on many occasions on previous episodes. And admittedly is something that if you are not willing to compartmentalize and sit over here while you're enjoying the comic strip, you're probably not going to enjoy reading the comic strip, because it's just everywhere. I mean, you could be reading what seems like a strip, Billy Make-Believe, written for children, and then all of a sudden Billy and Bub are shooting at wooden Indian toys, and it just feels wrong to us today. And probably should have then, but didn't, and that is the times that it was written in. Now, as for pre-adolescent boy heroes, that's not so much emblematic of the times, but what in the time they thought the audience was for comic strips and comic books. Now, they knew better, sort of like with violence and racism. They knew that adults were reading this material, but for some reason they just got it in their head that this was their main audience and that one that they had to target. So naturally, you're going to want to make your hero a boy because you think that a boy is going to want to read about a boy. So that's how we wind up with these three strips, and kind of why I chose them for today's episode. Now, there's something else that you may have picked up on in today's episode, and that is that I kept mentioning missing pages. In most cases, this was because not every issue of Tip Top Comics is scanned and available to read online, but in other cases, because those pages were actually skipped over and being reprinted in the comic book. And this might be because maybe the original art was lost from that particular day's strip, or maybe they couldn't find it in time for preparing that comic book for press. Remember, there's no digital files for these things in 1930s. You have to find the physical copy of the comic strip and paste it into a new page. So it is problematic sometimes to make sure that you have everything available. This is not an isolated problem. I've seen in other reprint books like this from the 1930s, as if rewarding the long-term reader with a followable plot is just a side bonus to getting new pages each month. So we'll probably encounter this problem in many more episodes to come. So what did you think? Would you want to read any of these three strips based on what you heard today? Let me know. And thanks for listening. Bye for now.